It's been about a couple of months since the release of Darren Aronofsky's controversial film, Mother. It isn't that often that a film that's so abstract and allegorical gets such a wide release, so the love it or hate it response that it got wasn't entirely surprising. Some found its biblical symbolism to be too hand-fisted, while others had a hard time grasping what was going on at all. When I went to see the film, I could overhear people as they walked out commenting on how dumb they thought the movie was. I, on the other hand, really enjoyed it. The cinematography, editing, and performances were all solid, and I was thoroughly immersed from beginning to end. My husband and I proceeded to discuss this movie non-stop for several days, and I don't think it was just because we loved it so much, because from what I saw online, it seemed as though people who hated it couldn't stop discussing it either. And I think that that's the intended effect of these type of films. They either speak to you or they don't, but at the very least they tend to get your gears turning, because when something is that abstract, you have to examine what it is you liked or disliked about it more deeply. So in this video, I wanted to recommend some allegorical and abstract films to you because there are plenty out there if you're interested. And even if you hated Mother, that's no reason to give up on art films altogether. I'm sure there's one out there for everyone, and you might even enjoy one of the ones I suggest in this video. So without further ado, let's get started with Aronofsky's 2006 film, The Fountain. The Fountain follows the story of Tom, a doctor who is desperately trying to find a cure for his wife Izzy's cancer. While Tom is busy with his research, Izzy is writing a book about the search for the Fountain of Youth. Izzy has accepted her impending death and is at peace with it. She wants to spend what little time she has left with Tom, but he becomes so obsessed with finding a cure for her that he has become incapable of accepting not only her death, but mortality itself. The film switches between three different time periods. The Spanish Inquisition is portrayed in Izzy's novel, modern day, and the year 2500. Because of the way this film is edited, there are a few different interpretations as to the specifics of the timeline, and it's up to you to figure out how they all work together to create the bigger picture. This is a clever and beautiful film, and if you're prone to getting emotional during films, be prepared to curl up in a ball and sob during the entirety of the credits. So if you're interested in stories that explore love and immortality, or maybe you just need a good cry, I suggest giving this tearjerker a watch. About 10 years before directing Ghost in the Shell, Mamoru Oshii made a fascinating little film called Angel's Egg. Angel's Egg takes place in an old city that is seemingly abandoned, with the exception of one little girl whose only possession is a giant egg that she keeps close to her at all times. One day, a stranger appears and inquires about her egg and what's inside of it. He's very mysterious and his motives are unclear, but the two eventually begin to spend more time together as they explore the strange world in which this little girl lives. There's very little dialogue in this film, and the characters are all nameless, so you have to pay close attention to the visuals if you want to have any sort of grasp of what's going on. The animation is hauntingly beautiful, and as the film moves along, you realize that a ton of dialogue isn't really necessary for the story being told. Also, the lack of exposition leaves a lot of room for personal interpretation. There are some biblical references that are pretty clear, and it's been documented that Oshii lost his faith in Christianity prior to making the film. But other than that, it's very abstract, so feel free to go nuts with your own personal interpretation. So it would seem, at least at this point in time, after seeing Blade Runner 2049, that Denis Villeneuve is pretty much incapable of making a bad film. I first became aware of Villeneuve when I saw his film Prisoners and immediately wanted to seek out more of his work. That's when I found out that he actually released another film that same year, and that's when I was exposed to the compelling puzzle that is Enemy. Adam, played by Jake Gyllenhaal, is an introverted college professor who seems to do little else besides go to work and come home. His only welcome human interaction seems to be with his girlfriend, who he spends time with in the evening, but even when they're together, it seems like he's disconnected and depressed. One night, he decides to rent a movie that a coworker recommended to him and is shocked to see that an extra in the film looks exactly like him. He begins to research the actor and finds out that his name is Anthony, and he just so happens to live in the same city. The two eventually meet, and the plot escalates from there. With this film, you have a couple of choices. There are some interviews with the director where he speaks very openly about his intentions with the film, so you could watch those prior if you think it might be a little too abstract for you to follow on your own. Or you could go in cold, form your own theory, and look up those interviews after you've sat with the film for a couple of days. Villeneuve doesn't go into a ton of detail about what every little thing in the film means, but rather explains what the film means in a broader sense. He also intentionally made it so that it could be interpreted in a couple of different ways. So if you're not entirely comfortable going into this film without him explaining a little bit about it to you first, it won't necessarily ruin it. But I recommend going in cold and seeing what you make of it first on your own. Jake Gyllenhaal's performances in this are outstanding, and this film has some very interesting symbolism involving spiders, so if that sounds compelling, Enemy might be the movie for you. Antichrist tells the story of a couple, played by Willem Dafoe and Charlotte Gainsbourg, whose young son dies tragically after falling out of an open window. Grief-stricken, Gainsbourg's character, who is simply credited as she, becomes hospitalized and is put on heavy medication. Dafoe's character, credited as he, doesn't feel that this is the right approach for her healing and decides to use his skills as a therapist to help her himself. The couple travel to a cabin that they own in the woods where the woman and her son spent some time several months prior while she worked on her thesis. They begin to do several sessions of exposure therapy in an attempt to heal both her grief and fear of nature, but it doesn't end up going so well. So I wasn't able to fully grasp this film upon the first viewing. I wasn't even sure if I actually liked it, but after watching it a second time, I felt as though I had a much better grasp of what was going on and ended up really enjoying it. So a couple of warnings about this particular movie. This film has very strong sexual content and is crazy violent, so if you have a sensitive little tum-tum, you might not be able to handle this one so well. But seriously, the violence in this is even challenging to the most devout of horror fans, so don't feel bad if you find it a little hard to handle. That's probably part of the reason why it's much easier to decode this film the second time around, because you'll be a little bit more prepared for its more shocking aspects and more able to focus on the finer details. So if some abstract violent horror sounds like it's up your alley, have at it, pal. Upstream Color begins with a young woman being kidnapped by a mysterious man who uses the power of suggestion to steal from her. And that's really all I can say about the plot of this film without either spoiling it or over-explaining its premise. This is Shane Carruth's second film. You may be familiar with his first film, Primer, which has been widely regarded as one of the best time travel films ever made. And the fact that it only had a budget of $7,000 makes that all the more impressive. Upstream Color had a little bit more money behind it, but $50,000 is still considered a micro-budget as far as filmmaking is concerned. Aside from directing, Carruth also wrote, produced, edited, and co-starred in the film. He also did the cinematography and composed the music, so yeah, it's no wonder there's about a 9-year gap in between the releases of his two films. There's only one other director I can think of that does all that.
I'm disappointed in your species.
Anyway, much like Primer, Upstream Color has quite a few layers of storytelling going on in it that are a little bit challenging to link together upon the first viewing. So if you enjoy this film, you may find yourself watching it multiple times to better understand how everything fits together. There's also plenty of info online, so you can rest assured that as you're frantically typing Upstream Color Explained into Google as the credits roll, there'll be several articles that are more than happy to explain everything to you in detail. In Jonathan Glazer's Under the Skin, Scarlett Johansson plays an otherworldly being who disguises itself as a human woman. The woman then travels around Glasgow, Scotland in a van from which she entices men to go home with her so that she can prey upon them. This is honestly one of my favorite performances of Johansson's, not only because she pulls off an incredibly convincing English accent, but also because she had to do some improvisation as many of the men in the van scenes were not actors and were not aware that they were being filmed. The director has stated that one of the great things about filming this way was that since this film is essentially an examination of human nature through an alien's eyes, that the narrative itself and the method of producing that narrative became the same. This also set a higher bar for the actors as they needed to blend in seamlessly with the people being filmed in the real world. This film is an incredibly visceral experience and demands your full attention, so if you're in the mood for some artistic sci-fi horror, I highly recommend Under the Skin. Millennium Actress was the first Satoshi Kon film I ever saw, and I've been in love with his work ever since. It tells the life story of retired actress Chiyoko Fujiwara as she's doing a retrospective interview about her career. She tells the interviewer about an occurrence early in her life where she helps hide a man who is being chased by the police for being a revolutionary against the war in China. The man is also a painter, and Chiyoko becomes captivated by him as he talks about his favorite place to paint and promises to take her there when peace comes. He escapes the next day, however, and she isn't able to say goodbye to him. All she has left of him is a key he leaves behind, which she keeps with her always. This turns out to be the driving force behind her decision to become an actress, as she is hoping that she will find him one day. The stories she tells of her real life melt together with the characters she's played over the years so much that we aren't really sure at times what is a film and what is really happening. Even the cameraman and interviewer, who also happens to be a big fan, becomes so captivated by her story that they become characters in it themselves. This is a truly beautiful film with some spectacular scene transitions and editing that only animation can provide. It's no wonder that many live-action filmmakers are so inspired by Satoshi Kon's work. I also need to apologize in advance again because this may very well be another film that will make you cry, so grab some tissues and give Millennium Actress a watch. The Tree of Life is one of the more unique coming-of-age stories I've seen. A good portion of this film is about a man reflecting on his childhood in the 1950s, in which he has a mother and father who have two very different outlooks on life. His mother is very easygoing and playful, while his father is very strict and overbearing. But this film is so much more than that. It's an examination of existence itself, as the story of this family is accompanied by the story of the universe as a whole. The cinematography is outstanding, which is no surprise considering it's done by Emmanuel Lubezki, whose resume includes The Revenant, Birdman, and Children of Men. This film also has what I feel is a really underrated performance by Brad Pitt. He does such a convincing job of playing this father who just really believes he's doing right by his sons by being so strict with them, and genuinely doesn't see the damage he's doing. Overall, this film is a meditation on life, the universe, and your place in it. So I would suggest putting on this film if you're feeling a little anxious, maybe you're having an existential crisis and need some perspective. So just make some tea or get high or both and let Terrence Malick's expert filmmaking wash over you. Look, if you want a beautifully crafted surrealist look at religion, consumerism, war, poverty, alchemy, and the path to enlightenment, watch this. If you're offended by exposed dicks and large hats, then don't. I can't hold your hand through this shit, okay? Holy Mountain, Alejandro Jodorowsky, fucking shave your head, burn your money, grow up. You're welcome. Eraserhead is the story of Henry, a man who upon arriving home one day is informed that his girlfriend Mary has called and invited him to dinner at her parents' house. He hasn't seen Mary in some time and finds out that not only did he get her pregnant, but that she's already had the baby. The two are told that if they get married, they will be able to pick up the child from the hospital and raise it themselves. Oh, and by the way, this is the baby. This movie changed my life. I literally laid on my living room floor for like 10 minutes after the first time I saw it. I was just astounded at how much I loved a film that I barely understood at the time. I have never seen something like this on film before, something so close to what an actual nightmare feels like. Did I mention that this film is kind of terrifying? Because it's kind of terrifying. It's also hilarious, but like intentionally hilarious.
I had an operation on my arm here. Doctors said I wouldn't be able to use it. Well, what the hell do they know, I said, and I rubbed it for a half hour every day. And then I got so I could move it a little, and I got so I could turn a faucet, and pretty soon I had my arm back again. Now I can't feel a damn thing in it. All numb.
That's the thing about David Lynch. His work has defied genre, and his aesthetic is so unique that his work and other work inspired by his is simply referred to as Lynchian. Speaking of David Lynch, he's such a wonderfully interesting guy. He's also too precious for this world and had this haircut way before any of you did. There are several documentaries out there if you want to find out more about him. I especially recommend his most recent documentary, The Art of Life, in which he talks about his coming of age and how painting led him to filmmaking. He's also pretty much the entire reason that my favorite episode of Louie is my favorite episode of Louie.
I didn't realize.
Comedy is about timing, son. Timing. You gotta get 'em, you gotta tell 'em,
There's even a video of him making quinoa online that's oddly compelling.
Quinoa is something that I like to have for dinner every chance I get.
Yeah, I'm a little obsessed, sorry. It's just so inspiring watching a filmmaker that truly loves what they're creating, and Eraserhead is absolutely a labor of love. It was Lynch's first full-length film, and it took an entire 5 years to make because they kept running out of money. Jack Nance also kept his hair like this for the entire 5 years this film was in production, so what do you know about dedication? Clearly not as much as Jack Nance, you lazy piece of shit. The baby was made using a cow or a sheep fetus, nobody really knows for sure, but it's one of the most convincing practical effects I've ever seen, so good job. Speaking of things nobody knows for sure, David Lynch has never revealed what this film is really about. He's given a couple of vague hints about it, but that's about it. I've seen it several times, and now have my own personal interpretation, and there's no shortage of Eraserhead explained articles, but there are really no clear-cut answers. And that's kind of the point, not only with this film, but all the ones on this list. They're meant to be thought-provoking. They aim to capture your imagination, and through your own personal analysis of this art, you might get to know yourself a little bit better. And well, I'll just let David Lynch explain it.
If you go after a film with holding abstractions to a coffee, place, and having coffee with your friends, somebody will say something, and immediately you'll say, no, that's not what that was about. This is what, and so many things come out. It's surprising. So you do know for yourself. And what you know is valid.